talking with Hussein from Outbound Gen. We're going to be talking about the state of Outbound right now in 2025 for B2B SaaS companies. Um, Thanks so much for jumping on a call with me. I'd love to learn a little bit more about what you're doing.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Thanks for having
yeah.
me.
Um, so yeah, why don't you tell me a little bit about Outbound Gen before we get started, so that we can sort of set the stage, and then I have a couple of questions I want to run through.
Yeah, we're essentially a go-to-market agency helping, smaller scale and mid-stage startups with setting up their pipeline infrastructure, getting them consistent demos, just building more brand awareness for their audience using cold email and LinkedIn and any sort of direct messaging platforms.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. I've seen some of the playbooks you're working on, and they're really impressive. Tell me a little bit about how you see sort of the state of play in the outbound space right now in 2025, and how it's changed from years prior. What are you seeing in the space?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a loaded question, right? I think outbound has changed drastically since 2022 when you
Yeah.
would send a cold email and you'd probably get a response back with, yes, I'm interested in demo and no. I think it's changed so drastically in the sense that, now reply rates are at 16% open rates and, barely any people are actually replying. What we've seen outbound being used more and more now is essentially the way people are running ads. So it's 85% of the time, a prospect that actually hops on a call already has the conviction of working with that product or with that solution. So I think that's kind of what we're seeing work really well is providing value as quickly as possible within those first few touch points.
No, I feel like response rates have been just abysmal lately on a lot of outbound email stuff. What are some of the tactics you're using to sort of to improve that number? I know that you talk a lot about like warm inbound and things like that. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you're doing to actually get some results out of cold outbound or from outbound?
Yeah. So I think deliverability is kind of the baseline here. So having great deliverability, making sure your infrastructure is set up correctly. The way we're doing is we're using a three-prong approach. So we have a private email server, we have Google, domains warming up and Gmail accounts, and then we have Outlook enterprise accounts. So using all three sort of prongs, it doesn't just pull in, if we have bad deliverability for one campaign, it's not affecting every single sort of arm here. So that's one way that we approach the deliverability side of things. I would say another layer to that, and this is probably a tool you've heard of, Clay, right? That's been an incredible tool for us to delineate on what the data is saying about that prospect. So basically plugging in their domain or that individual's LinkedIn, and we can pull all of the relevant data that we would need to associate if they would be a good fit for the product or solution that we're offering. So I think those are the two biggest levers right now that we're seeing work really well. I would say relevancy around data has been something that is intriguing, and I think companies like Unify and Clay, and some of these other newer tools out there are now looking at visitor identity as an indicator, or even people connecting on LinkedIn. That's not a direct way for you to say, "Hey, listen, I know you're on our website. I'm going to reach out to you," but it is an indicator to say, "Listen, they're at least aware of you and they know about you." If they've connected with you on LinkedIn, that's another opportunity, but I wouldn't say it's like a green light to go out and pitch them. So I think understanding how to essentially aggregate all of the relevancy sort of signals and from there come up with a, concluded sort of argument around, listen, this is why I think we should speak because you clearly know about us, you're clearly looking for the solution and you at least know about me if you're connected with me on LinkedIn. So those are just two small, examples on the indicators that we're looking for, but there's other ones out there. There's G2, there's product reviews, those types of ways where you can also just try to understand how in depth they are going into finding a solution like yours.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you highlighted there also is like understanding like the intent signals, but then how are you leveraging personalization around those intent signals? Are you using AI tools to customize messaging, or what is your approach there?
Yeah, so we always start out with a solid framework for messaging. So it's essentially like a hypothesis or a thesis around campaigns. So the thesis could be companies that are currently hiring for a specific role, and maybe one of our customers has a solution where it has a direct correlation to that. So we'll build that thesis, or we'll build our lead list around that thesis, saying like, go find me, all the companies that are in a Series A stage that are currently hiring for head of marketing, right? From there, we can start to build on the data points with secondary data points. So the primary data point is hiring. Secondary would be any sort of relevancy signals that we've seen in the past. So going back into platforms like Vector and RB2B to see who's actually interacted within the website, using that as leverage within the conversation. If you have a PLG motion, sometimes, people from the company can go up, sign into the product, try it out. That gives you leverage to say, listen, X person at company actually, tried out the product. Go talk to them, let them, they probably have some insights um, on how well the product works or whatever. So those are a few different relevancy, like personal signals that you wouldn't be able to find via Zoom Info or Apollo. And then now you can go further into the details with if they raised recently, if they've recently hired someone from the company, that could be a direct correlation to that product or solution that you're selling. So I think though it's kind of a compounding effect when it comes to cold email, and so you can start prioritizing leads based off of how many relevancy signals you can aggregate, and then again building up that conclusive sort of
Yeah.
argument. And so I think that's what creates the personalization within the copy itself, where you're not going out and manually doing all that.
You're not doing a one-to-one personalization, but like a very small category. You're basically like instead of fishing from the ocean, you're building small little ponds
Grouping.
from which to fish. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I love it. So another question I want to ask you about is just sort of general GTM motion stuff. So you're working with a lot of early stage startups. What are you seeing right now in, the state of startups? Where are companies missing the mark? Where do they need the most help generally?
Yeah, I think the biggest conclusion that we've come to around this has been startups are so ambitious and they're ready to kind of just hit the ground running, start selling and doing all the motions that a typical, Series B or mid stage or larger company typically does within their sales process. And I think within startups, you kind of need to take a step back and you need to understand a little bit more about who you're selling to and why they need your product. Every startup that we've spoken to, that wants to engage with us has a lofty goal of selling, or getting 100 demos every single month. And I think you need to kind of, you know, uh, do a little bit of a reality check on those expectations.
Mm,
And it's really understanding where can you find consistency within your messaging and what's resonating within the market. I think if you can find that, then you can start to use different levers and opportunities, for example, ads, SEO, newsletters, those types of things where everything sort of compounds. And then that's when you start to build that go-to-market engine. So I think from the baseline foundation, email and LinkedIn and all these different direct messaging platforms are a great way to test and hypothesize what is relevant within the market that you're selling into. So I think for startups, like that's probably the main thing that we've seen across all the board.
yeah. Um, yeah, so message validation is like a big part of what companies need to do at the early stages. Walk me through also what you had mentioned to me in the past, a little bit of a playbook around SEO to warm outbound, sort of using outbound as like a almost like a remarketing tool. Do you want to walk me through that sort of playbook and how you where it fits in for startups that you work with?
Yeah, I think startups that are getting a lot of eyeballs, whether that's through press releases, LinkedIn content, founder-led content, etc., they typically get a lot of visitors onto the website. And I think first things first, and most companies are now noticing this, but using some sort of visitor identity platform like RB2B, Vector, to capture that data. What we can do from there is using Outbound and Clay and Unify, you can aggregate that data, understand if that customer or that company that's showing up on your website is an actual fit or a potential lead. From
Mhm.
there, going further into understanding who was the individual that showed up to that website. Was it an economic buyer? Was it a person who would use the product like an end user? So once you can sort of identify those sort of categories, you can then sort of use that again, not as a direct indicator to say, hey, let's hop on a demo, but it could be a green light to say, there could be emotion here. So let's try to like give them a little bit of value up front. We know that you're looking at the X solution, right? given that that's the case, would love to share a little bit more about how we can help. Here's like 10 free licenses you can use for your team, right? So it's a way for you to sort of incentivize them to actually go out and try the product if they've shown up to the website. If that's a motion that you have. If it's a demo related motion, try to find some lead assets or ways you can maybe even get them to re-engage within your marketing sort of system. That also really helps with building up that B2B motion.
Yeah. I really love what you're talking about also, which is somebody told me early on in my starting this agency that you need to switch from always be closing to always be providing value. And then people will just close as a result of you building that relationship, you building that value with them. So yeah, I'm kind of curious. I again, with GTM motions for early stage startups, what is like the most common trend that you see right now that you would actually advise against? Is there anything in the space that you see people talking about where you just sort of cringe when you hear them mentioned? Anything that you would say like just stay away from, X, Y, or Z?
Yeah, this may be a this take is definitely, I guess, a little bit more biased here, but hiring an SDR right away, I don't think is the smartest motion for most startups because again, you don't know your messaging, you don't know who your customer is directly. So I think doing the diligence of understanding who your customer is, SDR should only be used to amplify whatever's working. And that same thing with the sales org too, right? If you're going out and hiring, 3 to 4 different sales reps and SDRs, like you should know exactly who you're targeting. They should also have a protocol and playbook to say, this is who we're going after. This is what's worked in the past. Now we're using this sort of human capital to just amplify that. So I think it becomes this sort of a cat and mouse game with, agencies like us and then SDRs and sales teams. But what we've seen work really well internally has been companies that have some general idea of messaging and who their customer is. And alongside, they have a sales team to sort of amplify that. And we're kind of the middle ground where we're just essentially metric focused. Um, Tasks, right? So you could say sending a certain number of emails or
Mhm.
personalizing a certain number of or yeah, emails and LinkedIn messages, et cetera, right? So taking the data and amplifying that, but then SDRs going in when the intent is hot, when they've seen enough signals to say, listen, they at least know about us, they've connected
Yeah.
with LinkedIn. So that's kind of where we're seeing the 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 point sort of cross.
I actually think that's a really great point. Like as an agency, we've hired in our history a number of SDRs, but without like a clear position or how we wanted them to go out and reach out to people, and it's not worked out. And then once we like sat down and defined like how we wanted to approach people and took more of a top down sales approach, it's been working much better.